Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Bottom Line. Today, I'm joined with a fascinating guest and all around just one of my favorite episodes that we've recorded, Drew Fallon, co-founder and CEO of Iris, basically an AI-powered profit planning platform for consumer brands. He was also the former CFO at MadRabbit. And we get into all the weeds of P&L, forecasting. We talk about our forecasting methodology. We talk about new versus returning customer, how to think about that. Biggest mistakes CFOs or CMOs are making when it comes to the P&L. We break down a couple brands. We talk about, hey, what are the areas of the P&L that you can improve the quickest? And we talk about his platform, Iris. So overall, I think for you guys that are looking to improve in this area or weak in this area, this will be a financial episode that's really focused on this. And at the end of the day, all business comes down to economics, comes down to finances. So this is a really, really good episode. It's obviously Drew is thinking about this the way that we are in terms of businesses and profitability. And yeah, I'm excited for you guys to listen in. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode. So Drew, I saw a tweet that you said, I just realized for the last 9 years, I've done basically nothing except study financials of consumer brands, which I thought was pretty hilarious. But where does your passion come from for this subject?
It's actually a pretty good question because it's so like weird to think about. I had like that revelation when I tweeted that, and I was like, wow, like that's like pretty sad in like some ways. But I got really interested in this stuff probably like 10 years ago at this point. Honestly, like I just thought it was so, maybe not 10 years, maybe 8 years. I just thought it was like so fascinating how like anybody could kind of like spin one up, right? Like when Shopify kind of became mainstream, which was probably like 2015 or something like that. The barrier to entry just got so low, and it kind of became like this beautiful mix of like art and science, where like the branding was the art component, but there's also like quite a bit of science with regards to like spinning up paid media and actually getting traction. And so I think like with like the Warby Parkers of the world and like the Red Antler era, there was like a creative, like a closeted like creative part of me that like wanted that. In reality, I'm like definitely much more of a numbers guy, and I'm not that great with like any creative stuff. But I don't know. I've always kind of found it like a pretty fascinating mix of like, branding and numbers. It's kind of a cool industry from that regard, where like you don't really have, even in like software now, like branding's not like as important, right? And so I don't know. I've always been kind of like drawn to like you get to do a little bit of both with regards to like creative as well as like quantitative.
So I saw your little breakdown on Allbirds, which I thought was really, really fascinating. You had something in there, basically, well, the ending was the point that you wanted to leave us with is that there's good growth and there's bad growth. If top line is growing, you also do so on a house of cards. Know your unit economics. This is, I've seen tweets, even as it relates to cost controls, everybody. We don't talk about that enough. But, I'm seeing ad accounts with cost controls, revenue's down, spend is down. And obviously Twitter is not for the nuance, but I just see those things and I'm like, revenue being down could be a very, very, very good thing. How is that bad? Obviously that there's a lot of context there that's missing, but it's kind of like, well, revenue's down equals automatically bad. But I thought that was an interesting take in that line of questioning around the Allbirds story.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the Allbirds story specifically had a lot to do with like the inflationary pressures from like 2021, early 21, late 2020, which like it was just interesting like how they responded, right? So like they responded by basically further compressing their gross margin with like discounting, which is like a horrible, horrible way to move product, right? Like if you have like a compressing gross margin, like you're just kind of like putting, insult to injury by like adding the discounts, like you very quickly are just like generating just negative contribution probably at that point. And like, especially when you're sort of overstaffed in the way that company specifically was, it was just like such a fascinating, like, it's like a dumpster fire of like these guys, clearly like were not merchandising their brand properly and had very lofty revenue goals. And like a company like Allbirds, I feel like, would be a fantastic company that does $100 million a year in revenue, right? Like, is that like a standalone, like publicly traded company? Like, no. But like, they wanted to book past 200 and get to 500 and get to a billion. And the problem is when you start to operate at a revenue scale that is not like naturally supported by your market, you start to sacrifice everything beneath the top line to actually get there, right? And it's kind of like when we talk about in like paid media, sort of like the point of diminishing returns, right, on like marketing spend. That also happens on like your cost of goods, right? And so you end up having to like start discounting to actually acquire these customers and actually move the product. And then so, your CAC is getting worse, your gross margin is getting worse. And sure, like maybe you're like moving the product, like the revenue is going up, but like you're a ticking time bomb. And I thought Allbirds was like a pretty dramatic example of that because like these guys went public and then like 3 quarters later, their gross margin is 20 points less than what it was. Like and it's not like it went from 70 to 50. It went from like 55 to like 35. Like it was like, holy shit.
They
Like,
already had bad gross margin. Yeah.
yeah. Like they didn't even have like a good like starting point. So like, I think it kind of just goes to show that like everything beneath the revenue, right, is like just as delicate as the revenue itself. And if you don't prioritize all the lines in the P&L, you're going to start to see it all kind of like collapse on each other.
So I'm curious to hear from you from the vantage point that you sit in, Drew. On our end, we're spending a lot of time with our clients right now where we're providing advice on how to allocate their ad spend as efficiently as possible that levels up to, that AMER or new customer ROAS target that they need to hit that ultimately ties to their top line revenue goal and their overall profitability goal. A majority of our clients, and a lot of clients that I think Cody speaks to in the sales pipeline or in business development, they don't really have a clear understanding of what each channel is really leading to. They're very confused by in-ad account performance and how that levels up to their blended AMER targets and their new customer revenue acquisition targets. On our end, when we go look into these channels at a high level, just to speak to it real quick, we see a lot of probably inefficient spend on Google and Amazon where they think it's actually more efficient than it is, but it's just blended out within a pretty ROAS on brand with non-brand. And where Meta is predominantly being underserved. With the seat that you sit in, I think you have a very unique seat to answer this and respond to this. What are you seeing on your end? Is it kind of in line with what we're saying? Do you have other additional perspectives to provide here? Because I think it'd be super valuable for the listeners.
So I think, yes, it's in platform has always been like kind of an issue. And like, to be honest, like I got burned by it like back in like 21 or maybe it's 2020, I forget, at MadRabbit. Like, we started doing like OTT. It was post iOS 14. So like, we started doing like TV stuff. And it took us like a month or two maybe to kind of realize that like, okay, like when I add up all the revenue from each of these ad platforms, like it's actually higher than what my revenue actually was. And so I think like people, and look, like, is that rocket science? Like, no, but like it does take like a little of like a hard, hard lesson. And I think it kind of like starts to beg the question, okay, like what is what is the best way to like attribute a lot of these platforms? And I think honestly, like more than anything, like unless you're like a really sophisticated and scaled brand, like you're just gonna be like majority Facebook, like whether or not you're spend or selling on Amazon or Shopify, it's like totally irrelevant. And so I think people over the last like really like probably 2 years, and it's funny to me that some people still talk about this, but like people are still kind of discovering that like Amazon has like a halo effect off of like your DTC advertising, even though like Amazon's like 6 times the size of Shopify with like a GMV perspective. So like, I think like people are sort of coming around to this idea of like a blended CAC. And not to plug Iris right away, but like one of the things that we did on Amazon was we created like basically a cohort module for Amazon, right? And so what that does is it allows you to understand like what are your net new unique customers from Amazon on a monthly or weekly basis, which helps you even understand sort of like the cross-channel CAC way better than just like trying to blend your Amazon into it a bunch. And so I think like people are definitely more warmed up to this idea of like whether it's a CAC or like an AMER. You got to get out of, unless you're like literally the media buyer and like you're executing, all the campaigns, like you need to get out of the managers, I think, like, because you're just going to drive yourself freaking crazy in there.
Yeah, it doesn't take into consideration the Amazon multiplier effect, like you're touching on. So, I mean, that's huge because I would say 99% of the brands that we work with don't even know that you can look at new customer revenue versus returning customer revenue within Amazon. And they don't make it easy. It's not built for marketers. It's absolutely horrendous. But the fact that that's within your platform, super valuable. And yeah, I mean, just the simplicity of it and the ease of visibility will be huge.
And it kind of matters a lot, like specifically like if you're like a food and beverage brand, I've noticed your like retention curve on Amazon like can be double what it is on Shopify. It's not the case for every single category, but it's definitely like a trend in food and beverage where like people, like if you're buying beverage, like exactly, yeah, like people just want it faster. Like it's just like rapid consumption. And so like we see, and which matters for your entire forecast, right? Because like if you want, like you could basically extrapolate like your Shopify retention curve and just like apply it to your Amazon revenue. But like now you're like totally misstating like what your expected retention is, which means like you actually think that you're going to acquire more customers than you are because you have a good, long tail repeat, which means you're probably spending too much to acquire those customers. And so it kind of becomes like and it depends how big your Amazon business is, right? Like if you have a tiny Amazon business, like you're not missing out on a lot of visibility. But if you have like a decent Amazon business, like those three variables that I just mentioned can actually cause like some significant misses in forecast. And so I think like it goes even like one step deeper than what you just even mentioned.
I have a good question for you. So obviously, and we're going to go a little bit deeper into the weeds here for listeners. So Cody, keep me on pace to make sure I'm speaking English here. So with obviously repeat rates on Shopify revenue specifically, Shopify, provides great data for you to be able to forecast that out pretty reliably, right? You have that customer cohort forecast where you can get a really clear understanding of, when new customers come in, how do they behave in month 0, month 1, all the way through month 12 on repeat order basis or a repeat customer basis. And it can get you a really accurate set of data and a really reliable set of data of how you can expect this to take place moving forward. Amazon does not have that. So you just brought up a phenomenal point. You cannot assume that your repeat rates and your returning customer revenue behavior, your retention metrics on Shopify apply to Amazon. So Amazon, I think, again, majority of our clients don't even know you can look at new customer revenue versus returning customer revenue. I'm curious to hear how Iris, let alone like this Shopify cohort analysis, right, that we applied to Shopify returning customer revenue. I'm curious how Iris, how do you guys forecast out Amazon revenue at that point on your end? Because I think that's insanely valuable for people. And I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So in short, I mean, because we've built into like the API and we have the same amount of data from Amazon, actually probably more data from Amazon than we do from Shopify, which is not available like in the Amazon seller portal a lot of the times. Like you can get it out of like their API, but they don't have like a very robust like front end, I wouldn't say. We do it the same way that we forecast the Shopify stuff now. And so like in our financial model module in Iris, like we have a Amazon new customer acquisition module, as well as like the same sort of waterfall cohort forecast for Amazon as we do for Shopify, which like pre-Iris and even during my MadRabbit days, like the best you could do was like basically apply like a cost per order on Amazon and just like not really know how many of those were new or returning. And so like you basically just like are totally guessing on your unit economics on Amazon. And so like I always assumed for MadRabbit that like, and this was probably like a stupid assumption, honestly, but like I didn't know what else to do. I would just say, okay, 100% of the orders on Amazon are new because I don't know if they're not. And like we didn't have like a huge subscription business or anything like that. And so, and I've seen this in a ton of financial models. Basically, any fractional CFO or internal CFO for that matter, if they don't have something, and I'm not saying Iris is the only thing that does this, but if you don't have something that will show you the Amazon cohorts, like you end up just doing like, I mean, it's so bad. Some people do like a percentage of like D2C revenue just like goes to Amazon. And it's like, that's like the least scientific. And like talk about, setting yourself up to like turn your revenue into a house of cards. Like those are the types of like little assumptions that you make. And then you're like, okay, shit, like if I'm going to be 20% of my D2C revenue, I'm just going to keep, juicing my spend. And then you end up like overpaying, for the end customer, and your unit economics start to decrease. And so it's like, it all comes back to just like visibility and understanding like what's actually happening within the business. And so to answer the question, in Iris, we do it all the same way because we've built into the connector in a way that gives us that level of granularity that we can't.
And I can just confirm that level of data is definitely not within Amazon seller account on its own, being publicly displayed. So like super valuable in the way that you're connecting to the API and showcasing this data.
It's been a year probably since I left MadRabbit, so I haven't been in an Amazon portal for a hot sec. But my understanding, and I went really, really deep on Amazon because we had a great scaling Amazon business, but you can see new to brand like customers, but that's about it.
But even that new to brand, by the way, is technically defining that as people that have placed an order for the first time in the last 12 months. So if they placed an order before that, it's still tracking them as a new, like their definitions for new customer and returning customer revenue are also
Very generous.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, man, you guys suck. So really cool what you're doing, man. And this podcast has turned into a sales call for me alone. So that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean it's kind of like I my whole perspective on these brands, right, is that like Amazon or TikTok or retail or whatever, it's generally like a requirement, I would say. Like if you want to basically get towards 10 million plus and like have like a pretty profitable business, there are like, of course, a ton of exceptions to that rule. But I think like getting past 10 million, like alone on Shopify is just like, it's like needlessly hard. Like, why don't you just go to Amazon? Like
Create more demand capture.
people who have decent brand awareness, like they'll launch Amazon and they'll do 100K in their first month.
Without Amazon spend.
Yeah,
It's important note, without Amazon spend.
Yeah, it's kind of like I always I think I remember having like arguments with people in like 2021 and being like, Amazon is the same thing as Google. It's not the same thing as Facebook. So like Amazon and Google together are both just demand capture, whereas like everything else is demand generation. And so like if you're not on Amazon, like not being on Amazon is like not running Google ads. Like, do you absolutely need them to like get people to the website and to buy? Like, no, but like you're definitely leaving money on the table if you don't just like introduce that layer of demand capture. And whether or not that's running ads on Amazon is not exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I'm just saying being on Amazon.
There's a problem today with too much fake UGC saturation. Consumers are looking for authentic reviews and content, and this is a way that you can stand out in your crowded market with authentic influencer content. So Cody here with an ad read for Get SARAL. So there's an explosion of D2C brands across categories. You got to be able to stick out. We here at Kinship actually use SARAL for influencer discovery, but SARAL is not just a discovery tool, but a way that you can search for brand aligned influencers, but reach out directly. You can manage them all in place. You can track performance all within one platform. So brands like Avi, Legends, Tab Chocolate are using them to get hundreds of creators talking about them on socials, and you can too. And in addition to that, all of our clients here at Kinship that are doing seeding are using that platform as well. So you can start your free 7-day trial with SARAL to get authentic UGC. Go check them out. I'm curious, Drew, actually, for the 70, you said 70 plus brands on Iris, how many are all on Amazon? Or off the top, maybe you don't know that metric.
No, I mean, I don't know the exact number, but we probably have 4 brands that only sell on Shopify.
If you had to guess, what split between Shopify, like .com and Amazon in terms of revenue?
We have some pretty large Shopify brands. So if you like kind of took those out, it's probably 70. So even taking those out, it's probably like 70% Shopify and 30% Amazon. But like, Jones Road is like a customer on Iris, and like they're only on Shopify and they're like massive. So like you have to kind of account for like that, that outlier, if you will. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just curious. Well, do you think there's a healthy benchmark for that split? So I think Amazon, what's nice about Amazon, and like maybe, and Taylor, sounds like you're in the weeds on some of this stuff, like, like brand analytics, like the modules in Amazon, like you can tell like how big your category is on Amazon. And so I don't know that there's like a good benchmark that people can just sort of subscribe to without looking at it category by category. Because like it's actually pretty scientific. And I have an investor named Chris Moe who is just a guru with this stuff. But like if you have like an enormous Amazon category, so like let's just say like like tattoo care like was not like an enormous Amazon category, right? And so like for MadRabbit specifically, like it might be a little bit different of a mix, but if you're selling like cleaning supplies, like that's huge on Amazon, and so your ratio should be a little bit different. So I don't know. I wouldn't feel comfortable like saying there's like a sort of end all be all ratio for it. I think you have to look probably pretty category by category. It's a fun question. Everybody thinks about it, but benchmarks are usually not helpful. Usually not, unless you can categorize them. And then it's interesting, right? Like, and like, so Iris, like one of the, like we have a benchmarking thing that helps people benchmark like their margins and unit economics and stuff. And it wasn't useful 3 months ago because we only had 30 brands or 20 brands or whatever. But now that we have, closer to 100, we can actually break them out into categories and like provide useful insights. And that'll only get like more interesting. But yeah, like when it was like a benchmarking feature for like everybody on Iris, it's like, okay, well, am I comparing my soda brand to this guy's like shoe brand? Like it's not.
Right. It's all relative to the business model.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, speaking of benchmarks, what are the benchmarks that you're putting in platform on Iris in terms of gross margins or percentage of rev on OpEx? Are there any other benchmarks that you're having in platform?
So what's cool about Iris from the benchmarking perspective is that like no matter how your accounting ledger is like organized, right? So like some people will have like their postage expense in their OpEx, and some people will have their 3PL and their SG, like whatever. Like what Iris does, like we actually use AI to like take all that stuff and like put it apples to apples for everybody. So that's really like the secret sauce for a lot of what we do. But the reason I bring it up is because it sort of validates like why you should listen to these benchmarks. And like even for like a company like Lifetimely, for example, that like has benchmarks, like it's just like not the same thing because they don't have the accounting integrations and they don't have like the sort of recategorization engine. But like I'm looking at it right now, we have probably 30. Like there's CAC, there's MER, there's AMER, there's LTV, there's total returning sales versus like total new sales. And so it's not even like a benchmark. It's just like you get basically like plotted on a plot where you can see kind of how you stack up. Like freight costs.
If you're a beauty brand going into Iris, you could actually see where you stack up industry wide on all these different categories that you just said.
Yeah, it looks like it just looks like, I'll show it real quick. It just looks like a
let's do a product
like
demo.
a progress bar almost. So like this is a demo account, so like nothing's like filled, but like you would have like, if your AOV was like in the 99th percentile, you would be like all the way over here, right? And if your, gross profit sucks, like you'd be like all the way over here. And so like what that kind of allows you to do is understand like where are the areas of opportunity like for the business, right? Because like if I have, the best LTV in the entire Iris data set, like I'm not going to break my back like trying to get more LTV. My time and resources are probably better spent trying to, look at how I stack up for gross margin or CAC or something like that, and then spend, a quarter or two diving into those lines and really seeing like, okay, like can I get a point or two of margin expansion out of here? And what you would do from like a corporate finance perspective is just like identify like each of those opportunities and then just prioritize them by like the expected return, right? So like is a point of gross margin is worth way more than a point of like marketing expense for a low gross margin company. And so you basically just like stack it up, in that sort of and then you just quarter by quarter, you just knock them out. And then, eventually you have like a good business.
And just on that point of the benchmarks across each of these businesses, like we're typically looking at like the 4-quarter accounting, right? So you have profit, you have your OpEx, you have your ad spend, and then you have your cost of delivery. But for example, like in a brand with, 400% LTV over the course of the year, I'm going to be way more okay with a higher cost of delivery on that brand versus someone that has hardly any LTV over the course of the year. So does the platform with the benchmarks that you're putting out there take that into consideration based on category, based on industry, that sort of thing?
You're saying like just with regards to, well, yeah. So yes, like the answer is yes. And I think what is also important to kind of consider though, and like this is like why I have some beef with like the 4-quarter accounting thing. Like I agree, like that's the proper way to sort of break it down. But like what you just described is like actually kind of dangerous because like there's quite a bit of like a working capital delay that's involved with that, right? Where like you effectively have like outlaid this CAC for this customer that you expect to return a 4x over the next 12 months or whatever you said. That's great that you know that. There's a balance sheet impact though to that. And so like people who are forecasting their P&Ls using like this 4-quarter accounting, a lot of times they like aren't also forecasting the balance sheet. And so like however long it takes to get those 4 orders, like there's like a cash like delay there, right?
Like we're taking it serious in the cash conversion cycle here. Do you have the money actually to invest in the inventory to supplement these orders? For sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's like the only thing I would add to that. But yeah, I mean, I think the way that like you describe it is also how I think about it. But I would just add that like there's a little bit more to it than that. But it doesn't really manifest in the benchmarks per se. It's more of like a balance sheet forecasting.
You brought up the main thing, cash is king, right? And that's what you're bringing up and servicing. You got to make sure you got that to keep the wheels moving.
Yeah, and like people, that's like the real problem. More than anything is like, okay, like if I think that I'm going to grow my sales this much and it's going to be this many returning customers and I buy this much inventory, like this is what happened to Allbirds. And when I wrote about that is like their inventory went up every single quarter, and like their sales like went down. And so it's like, okay, like now, like how does that make, like that doesn't make fucking sense, right? Like you're totally screwed. And so like, I think I'd be curious your guys' perspective on this, but like I feel like when I talk to a brand that's like basically like in not good shape, it's almost always because they have too much inventory from like 2 years ago. Like, they thought that they were going to go to the moon, and then now it's like, okay, now they're just sitting with like no cash. So that seems to me to be the biggest problem.
Oh, well, you already got ahead of a future question here too. What are the areas of the P&L you can improve the quickest, or like areas of a business you can improve the quickest? And it seems just like one, this is where Iris and having a proper forecast would help moving forward, because it helps you plan for inventory, right? And so it seems like that's one of the biggest things you've identified as, a cost center for business. But what are potentially other areas of the business that you see? And again, on our end of the seat that we sit in, we typically see floated OpEx as one of the biggest things. But I'm curious, from the seat that you sit in, what are you guys seeing?
I would concur, but I don't know that it's like payroll all the time. It's almost always like you have a bad deal with like some vendor on like something. Like I've seen like some businesses where like they're literally paying, like I know like for a fact like they're paying double to like some software or like some agency kind of a thing. So that I definitely agree with that. I think more than anything though is like the 3PL expense. So like if you're using like something, like a Ship Hero or like whatever, you almost like always have opportunity to like cut that expense, and it's usually the biggest one. So like a lot of these like beauty brands, for instance, like it costs more to ship this stuff than it does to make it. And so like the biggest line on your P&L is like this 3PL expense, and you ship it out of California, but your biggest market is New York City. And so you're literally shipping like the majority of your orders like across the country, right? And so I think people who haven't like set up like a little bit more of like a robust distribution network, they probably have huge low hanging fruit. I mean, like just the postage alone can literally be reduced by 50%, by sticking a 3PL in New Jersey or whatever. And Ship Hero might have been like a bad example. I don't know anything about Ship Hero, but they might do that sort of automatically. There's probably like some providers that do that.
They're actually a sponsor of the podcast.
Oh, are they? Okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So because like Deliver used to do that automatically, like for you. I don't know if like Ship Hero does, but like most of the 3PL industry like is not like in those like sort of like brand names, right? Like it's like these mom and pop type like fulfillment centers that are really tiny, that are not exactly like cost optimization like people per se. So I think like my first look would generally be at like the 3PL, just because I do think like a lot most often, unless you're spending a ton of money on acquisition, that's going to be like your biggest line. And like production costs, so like product costs, those only change with scale, right? Like you can't like, sure, like can you negotiate those? Like maybe, but like, you're not just gonna like up in one quarter and like get 3 points of expansion out of like your product costs.
I'm actually surprised, and I think it would be a healthy exercise if everybody acted like they were going out of business and they just attacked and ruthlessly attacked their P&L for areas of opportunity. Because I'm honestly surprised most people don't negotiate those terms with your manufacturer or fulfillment more often, because if they acted like, hey, every point matters, and this every point could make a huge dent in our profitability, there'd be a lot more healthy brands out there. But I honestly feel like it's a lot of people that just get used to paying this expense and they don't even think or reconsider how it could potentially be a little bit cheaper.
And they don't really have benchmarks for it. Like when I like running MadRabbit or any other brand, it's like, wait, am I paying more than like other people are paying for 3PL stuff? Like I I don't know. Like, I feel like now that like, you guys probably see this too, like we have access, to several dozens of brands now. Like when you're running a brand, like you maybe have like some friends in the industry, right, that you talk to, but like I feel like enlightened kind of like being on the other side now, just like seeing how some people run these things because like, I mean, I had like a handful of friends that I would talk to when I like at MadRabbit, but like I didn't like have, this much. And granted, like Iris, like obviously sees a lot. But I feel like now there's like there's an opportunity, just like the benchmarking feature in Iris and like anywhere else. It's like the real benchmarks that you should be looking at are like the ones that are associated with unit economics, like CPM benchmarks and like, whatever marketing platform, like, I don't know, like, is that really useful? Like, not for me personally, but maybe for other people. Like, what I'm interested in is like, where am I overpaying on my P&L? Not like, did my, August CPMs jump more than like the other guys?
Last question here. What's your bottom line advice?
I think, now more than ever as like an e-com operator, have a good gross margin is like the advice. And I think that kind of was spoken towards in like the Allbirds breakdown, where like you can never escape a gross margin. And if you have a low gross margin, you need to pursue alternative distribution channels that are not like an owned and operated website, whether that's Amazon or a retailer. Like you need to find ways to aggressively expand your gross margin if you want to grow an online brand. And I see this more and more, with some of these home goods brands, that they have these high AOVs with like decent margins. And those are the ones that can actually find a way to sort of scale. So I think understand your gross margin. It's actually not as easy as it sounds to actually know the gross margin and actually have like a great handle on, because the way that you calculate your cost of goods sold is right. It's like your beginning and ending inventory balance. And so like, if you don't have like a WMS set up, you actually have a hard time even knowing like, how much inventory am I holding? And so it kind of starts from like an operational perspective, like getting your like operation, down and getting the proper systems in place to give you the visibility to understand truly your gross margin. Like my first brand, I calculated gross margin wrong for like 18 months and I was overstating it. Seriously, I was overstating it by like 9 full points. Yeah, because my supplier at the time did not have a software for the WMS. I didn't know, he would go in once a month and count the stuff. But like I didn't know that like we were losing, a pallet every other week. And so like those costs are being absorbed into, that's a, a dramatic example, but my point is know your gross margin and know that your gross margin. It's kind of a thing, right? Like you need to, and then you can work backwards from there for everything else.
So good, man. Drew, thanks for being on the show. Where can people find you or sign up for Iris? 100% off discount offer for our listeners.
I'm on Twitter, Drew Fallon 12. If you want Iris, you can DM me or you can go to irisfinance.co. I think we have a demo link up there. I haven't done much work on that website, but we should probably figure it out. So Twitter's probably the best way.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Drew.